Backyard Professor Chess videos. The game I want to illustrate to you today shows a very interesting kingside attack, but I want to elaborate basically on what generates that possibility. This is a game, this is the Ruy Lopez, the opening. I know several of you have asked about me doing chess openings, and I will do so. I've got probably half a dozen games that I want to illustrate first, kind of get me warmed up back into making these chess videos, and then I'll pick 4 or 5 openings for white, 4 or 5 openings for black. I'll elaborate on the philosophy and the idea of what each opening is trying to accomplish as far as offense, defense, and then I can find, say, a dozen games per opening so that we can have a good time learning openings. And I will do that here in the near future, I promise. For now, this is by A.W. Fox, is the white, and the black player is J.H. Bauer. The Ruy Lopez, which is a king-pawn opening, and the knight comes here, and the knight goes there to C6, and then the classic Ruy Lopez is bishop over here to B5. He's going to pin this. What essentially this is doing is, now if black moves the d-pawn either to here to give his central pawn support or here to fight and contest for the central squares, either way, what he's done to himself now is, at this point, is he's limited the ability of this knight to have central influence, either here or here, because he's pinned, if he moves that d-pawn. So Bauer didn't. Bauer came out here like this with both knights, and now he's hitting this E4, and then he's hitting this D5 square here. So he's not worried about the pin at this point. He's not really making a big deal about it. And the white player castles. Bauer goes ahead and takes the pawn. Now at this point, in a castling, the white player can move his rook over one after you castle, and this gives him a beautiful open file, you can see. This is really nice. Open files, especially the central open files, are the highway to your opponent's territory. So when you can, grab an open file. And so this is what he's done at this point in time. And he drops back the knight. Now the two knights still have pretty good central influence. Yeah, he's moved this knight a couple of times. Development is, white is slightly ahead because of the rook coming here and the 2 minor pieces, but like I say, development is a temporary thing. If you don't take advantage of your developments, you can fall back behind, or your opponent can even it out. So, and then he goes ahead and takes this pawn here, virtually forcing black's next move, because he has the open file, and now he's got a discovered check to the king. If he doesn't do anything here, he can virtually move this knight to here or take the knight. It's a free, here the king could take it, but if he came over here, he got a free knight if black doesn't do anything. But of course black does. He pulls the bishop out to here. I want to make sure I keep track of where I'm at. Well, white drops his bishop all the way back down. I've seen this in a lot of games. I'm personally not comfortable with it, and maybe that's something I have to just through experience pick up, but once I develop a piece, it's really tough for me to take it right back down, because now truly white is behind in development. You see how that flip-flopped? That switched? And what I mean by development is, now he's got 3 minor pieces out here, and white only has a main minor piece, and it has no support other than the rook. He does have an open file though, and he can pin this bishop once he moves that knight, so he's not in a desperate situation, but now he's less developed. And that's important to keep that in mind as we see that. Black went ahead and castled, so now that just virtually eliminates any kind of a discovered check or a pin to the bishop once the knight moves, which is probably fine. Now, he's bringing up some central support. A knight has to have an outpost, meaning that it must have support from a pawn. And it's a central pawn, which is a good move. So that's nice. Well, now he's moving his knight again out here to f5. He's going to be hitting down into this territory possibly, because this is the castle king side, of course. And white is taking his time. He is systematically giving himself a chance to retain central power. This is never wrong. Now he has pretty good central support. True, it wasn't a power that he moved. He has done 2 pawn moves. But now this knight is really quite strong. Now it's not invincible because he's got pawns here that can chase him away. But he is controlling the center. He's fighting for the center because black also is really hitting the center as well. So this is becoming a very tough central game. It's really getting interesting. Now, black presses the central pawn here, which is interesting. White proceeds to develop, moving his queen up. Now black decides, I'm also going to take this open file. So this is always correct. I hate using the word always here. But when you have an open file and you've put your rook on it, or when your opponent has an open file, it's okay to challenge that file. In fact, if it's a central open file, a lot of the grandmasters tell you, challenge that open file. Don't just give your opponent an open file. So this is a good move. Now, is it defensive? Is it offensive? I don't know, but it's a good move at this point because it further develops the rook and it challenges the open file. A very important thing. I'm probably making too much beef about that, but now you can see, and I know it's a lot of pawn moves. That's okay because the systematic strengthening of your position, you're trying to not open so that you have a lot of weaknesses, right? I mean, there's no good in that. When you support an outpost knight with 2 separate pawns like this, this is quite strong. Being in the center, in fact, he's across the frontier line here. He's into black territory. This is a very strong knight at this point. He's putting pressure here. He really is. That is a strong move in my thinking. Well, he moves his knight back to d6. Very interesting. Now, he's moved that knight quite a bit. So white is developing further. Now, you see how it's gone back and forth. First, white had the better development. Then black ended up catching white and actually surpassing white. And now it seems to me that white has more territory. He's certainly got more control of the center as such. He has stronger pieces developed. The queen here is better than the queen there. The knight here is vastly superior to either one of these knights or that bishop. And the rook here is better than the rook. So systematically, white is doing a build-up where he is making each of his pieces stronger than his opponent's pieces. Now this is good chess. Jeremy Silman says this is very, very essential to do if and when you can. He's making it happen is what he's doing, right? And now black does something that why? You know, you can't help but ask why. This accomplishes nothing. I understand he wants to come into here and possibly bring some pressure down here, but that's not the right move. White is too focused on the center. There's too much here to be doing a wing attack at this point. His center, the black center, is not secure as such. You know, yes, he's got a pawn and he's touching the central squares, and yes, the knight is also touching the squares and all, but this doesn't work. That wasn't the right move. This gives white, now watch. Now he's moved this piece a few times, right? And now black is moving this piece again. This gives white a chance to further develop. Not only toward the center, but now he's got 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 minor pieces and 2 very major pieces. And black now has 3 minor pieces and a pawn. A single pawn, but the pawn chain of white is really strong. So you can see systematically how white is just getting stronger. Right? This is very important. Well, now he moves his knight again. He's done a lot of knight moves. However, look, the knights aren't that badly placed. That one is. I shouldn't say the knights, but this one is okay. He's putting the threat to the rook, and so the rook is going to come over here. Now, and again, I can't remember where I got it. Maybe it was out of Nimzovich or Steinitz, or I can't remember, one of the early ones, Tartikover. Rather than simply pulling the rook back down here, that accomplishes nothing. Truly. Really. Don't do that. You've got it out. You've made a move to develop it. So keep it in the field of play. You pull it back down here, and it's behind the pawns. It's behind too much. It doesn't exert as powerful of an influence. White brought it over here to the H-file in front of the pawns. And now, granted, yes, I understand he left the open file. So now black has that open file. But look at the open file he has here. It's open because he's in front of the pawns. But look at the influence. And this is the side the king has castled on. So this is good, I would propose. This is good. I wouldn't ever drop it back down. No, that won't help you. This is much stronger move than putting it back. Or even if you dropped it back to here, just one. This is the stronger move, in my opinion. I've said enough about that. Knight comes to H4 here. Now watch. He pushes the pawn to G4. He doesn't chase the knight away by putting it to G3 first. Why would you do that? By pushing the pawn twice, one, you acquire more territory. It is on the king's side, but look at what it does to the knight. It takes away a central square, a central post of that knight. The knight can no longer come back to here if it's ever threatened again. Isn't that nice? Yes, it's covered by the bishop here, so the queen can't take it. But now the pawn blocks that. So that's an excellent pawn move. Now the knight is virtually forced to come back to here. And he does move it. I mean, he's not forced to move, but he goes ahead and moves anyway. Comes back here to knight G6. And now the rook advances to H5. You notice how he's using his file with his rook. So far, it's true, black has that open file, but he hasn't used his rook on that open file. It's not doing a lot sitting there. You can see white has brought his rook out, and now it's very active, right? Again, I'm going to emphasize this in the videos because this is what Silman says. Among others, there's several grandmasters. Alekhine was a master at this. Fischer was a master at this. Bobby Fischer did this. Notice how each piece of white's developed powers is superior to his opponent's. This rook has much more activity than this one. This is on an offense, this is on a defense, more or less, if it's doing anything. Okay, I lied. The bishops, this bishop is developed. But the knights, the central space here, you can just see the whole center is just coming up to a glob of red. You only have one mere black unsupported pawn, except by the queen, so what? You've got a knight out here that's doing absolutely diddly squat nothing, and this knight has been pushed back. White is playing a good game here, in my opinion. This is really... Observe how each piece of white is superior to the black ones, the rook and the rook, except for the bishops. But overall, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 developed powers. You have a wonderful power. You have wonderful influence all the way across this area. That's a pretty good development, man. You wanna notice things like that when you're playing. Make each one of your pieces superior to your opponent's, and you'll play stronger chess. Right? Enough of that noise. Rook h5. Now this knight finally comes back to c6. And he realized, now see, he's had 1, 2. He's lost 2 moves because that knight virtually did nothing. It accomplished nothing going to the edge of that board. If you must put your knight on the edge of the board, have a plan involved so that you don't leave it there for 3 or 4 moves, so that you bring him right back into the game if you're trying to get to a specific certain square. Unfortunately for him now, that square wouldn't have worked, so he came back. So now he's bringing up his knight to coordinate with his knight. He's just systematically advancing. And you say, wait a minute, hold the phone. What on earth would that accomplish? You're putting a knight directly in line with the pawn. Why would you do that? And in fact, he does take the knight. Now, and it's threatening the queen. Now the queen could take that pawn and be coming around here. But here's where the fireworks start happening. I want you to observe something. And this is something that it takes training. It takes you a little while to do, and I'm still no good at it, but I try to work at it as often as I can. Observe where the white's pieces are pointing. And what I mean by that, this rook is coming across this way, but he's also coming here toward the king. The pawns are forward advanced, and they're supporting, they're virtually owning this territory here. The knight is coming over toward the king. The rook is coming over toward the king. You have excellent pawn support coming toward the king. The queen is pointing toward the king's side. The bishop here is pointing toward the king's side. So a good plan that white has already worked out is he's going to do a kingside attack. All of the board says white is going for that king. Now what support do the black pieces have? Is there much coordination? Is there much support? He has one knight. And I know, yeah, he's behind the pawn wall. All right, that's fine. You can bust through that barricade easy. He has one supporter and somewhat not really of a supporter here. This knight's no good. The queen hasn't done anything. The rook hasn't done anything. The bishop and the rook are undeveloped. Those pawns. Black's not prepared for what white's going to do now. Even though white is now a knight down, watch what white does. Kaboom. Bang. And you're going, what the? Yeah. Watch this. This is powerful, man. A queen sacrifice. Why can he pull this off? Because of the nature of his development. Again, his pieces are coordinated together here so that he can pull off this kind of a kingside attack. What he's doing is prying the king open. And you say, it would take more guts than I have to take a knight with a queen. I understand that. Me too. I'm with you. But watch how white did this. Black responded with this, and now we have the first weakening of the kingside pawn structure. Now what do you suppose white does? He has another real lulu of a move. He takes the pawn with that powerful central knight that black never bothered to exchange. Now black would have been better off bringing this knight back here if he wouldn't have quit goofing off and just simply eliminated the knight, done the exchange. Yeah, it would have gave white a screaming pawn chain. But now look, now black is in trouble because now the rest of the king's side gets shattered here. And watch how niftily white continues developing all the way to the end of the game. Whereas black didn't hardly do a thing. He simply couldn't. Now he brings his bishop back out, takes that pawn, and goes check. Notice the open file. King can't come here or here. That's the only square he can come to. And white simply drops the rook and says checkmate. That's another really excellent game, illustrating what I believe is one of Jeremy Silman's best teachings in his chess course. Is he says systematically make each one of your pieces superior to your opponents. We saw that in this game systematically. White was in no rush. See, you don't have to rush an attack like that. You can systematically build it, and then as you have enough pieces out here, it just kind of falls into place almost, doesn't it? Because you have power after power after power after power to be able to go into this. And he had more territory so that he could coordinate his pieces back and forth stronger. So these kind of chess games, it's important to look for those ideas. The key to this game, I believe, and the illustrator, the author, Horowitz, it's in one of his books, he didn't illustrate it the way I did, but I believe the key to this game is to actually see and recognize how white's pieces, one by one, became superior to every one of black's pieces. Not only in position, but in development. They were all out here together, and then they could coordinate with each other on which ones to sacrifice. And it ended up being a magnificent queen sacrifice and a magnificent knight sacrifice. So that was an excellent game. So there's your game for the day. Thanks for watching my Backyard Professor Chess videos. These are a blast to make. I love studying these games and making these videos. It was really, really snowy today, as you saw at the first of the video in the introduction. So I am in my basement enjoying my day making chess videos for you guys. So have a great life. Study hard. Enjoy your tournaments. Good luck in all your tournaments. And I will see you in the next video.